A billionaire CEO threw shade at a small-town mechanic right in front of her entire team. But when he solved a problem her top engineers had spent weeks puzzling over, the room fell dead silent. "Fix that engine, and I'll marry you." The words hit the room like a slap, not because of what was said, but because of who said it. Sabrina Holt, the razor-sharp CEO of Helix Dynamics, a rising giant in the tech world, wasn't exactly known for humility. Reclining in a sleek leather chair at the head of the boardroom table, her voice dripped sarcasm as she launched the comment like a dart across the room. On the opposite end stood Malik Johnson, grease still on his fingers, his gray shirt tucked neatly into a pair of weathered jeans, steel-toed boots leaving faint tracks on the polished floor. He looked completely out of place. This boardroom was the domain of tailored blazers, white-collar polish, and pedigrees built on years of advanced engineering degrees. Malik wasn't part of that world. He was a mechanic from Kansas City, brought in, some believed, as a last-ditch joke. The chuckles that followed Sabrina's line weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to slice. A couple engineers smirked. One leaned back and muttered, "Yeah, good luck with that." Another folded his arms, eyes on Malik like he was waiting for him to fold. But Malik didn't blink. He stepped forward with the kind of calm that doesn't need to prove itself. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but steady, "I didn't come here for laughs. I came because I heard you had a problem no one else could fix." His words shifted something in the room. A few younger engineers lifted their eyes, suddenly unsure. Sabrina raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth curling into a smirk. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that after 4 straight weeks of my best people working night and day, you're going to walk in here from a garage on the south side and do what they couldn't?" Malik met her gaze, unfazed. "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm saying." Sunlight spilled through the glass walls behind them, casting long angles of light over the polished floor, a spotlight on the standoff. Behind Malik stood the prototype, Helix's pride, mounted on a rolling platform, its guts exposed, wires, panels, and frustration on full display. It was supposed to be revolutionary. Cleaner energy, more power, game-changing efficiency. But it had failed every test. It either stalled, sputtered, or shut down completely. Sabrina's voice sliced through the silence. "All right then, Mr. Johnson. Let's see what you've got." Her tone had the confidence of someone who thought she already knew how the story ended. Around the table, engineers leaned back, murmuring under their breath, waiting to see him fall on his face. But Malik walked straight to the engine, calm as ever. From the bag he carried, he pulled a small, well-worn toolkit. Every motion was intentional. One of the senior engineers, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "He doesn't even know the system specs." Instead of snapping back, Malik looked up and said evenly, "Engines all speak the same language, sir. Some just whisper in ways you haven't learned how to hear yet." That shut the room up. He didn't sound cocky, he sounded certain. For the first time, Sabrina felt something unexpected, interest. But curiosity is tricky. When you're used to being the smartest person in the room, it can quickly turn into defensiveness. Sabrina Holt hadn't been born into boardrooms. Most people assumed she had. Polished, powerful, unstoppable. But the real story was grittier. She grew up in Mesa, Arizona, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a night shift nurse. Money was always tight. Her childhood wasn't ballet classes and weekend getaways. It was fluorescent kitchen lights, overdue bills, and the rattling sound of her mom's engine coughing to life every morning. What made Sabrina different wasn't access. It was hunger. That constant, gnawing drive to do more, be more. She fought her way into Arizona State, balanced 2 jobs while studying engineering, and figured out early that if she wanted to win, she had to outwork and outsmart everyone around her. And she did. By the time she hit her stride at Lockwood Tech in Phoenix, she had earned a reputation. She didn't flinch in rooms full of older men. When her designs got dismissed, she pulled all-nighters and walked back in the next morning with a perfected version. The promotions came quickly. The respect took longer, but she forced that too. By her mid-30s, she wasn't climbing the ladder anymore. She was pulling out the rungs behind her. So when the offer to lead Helix Dynamics came along, she jumped. The company had big dreams, renewable energy breakthroughs, power systems that could reshape entire industries. And they needed someone relentless. Sabrina Holt was that, and then some. But as her success grew, so did her edge. By 42, she was known for being brilliant and brutal. Investors loved her. Competitors feared her. Employees tiptoed around her. To Sabrina, that wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Results mattered. Feelings didn't. So when someone first floated the idea of calling in a mechanic from Kansas City, she laughed. Her engineers were elite, handpicked from the best programs in the world. If they couldn't fix the engine, what hope could a grease-stained outsider possibly have? When her assistant first mentioned Malik Johnson's name, Sabrina almost laughed. The idea of bringing in a mechanic to solve what her elite team couldn't? It sounded absurd, until her ego stepped in. Something about the challenge intrigued her, not because she believed he could succeed, but because letting him try and fail would send a message. To Sabrina, this was strategy, a performance. If she let this man from a garage walk into her domain and stumble in front of her engineers, it would only validate what she already believed. Not everyone deserves a seat at her table. That's why the line came so easily. Fix it, and I'll marry you. For Sabrina, it wasn't flirtation. It was dominance. A demonstration of control. Theatrics designed to remind everyone in the room who ran the show. Yet as she leaned back in her chair, arms folded while Malik quietly unpacked his toolkit, a memory broke through the armor of her confidence. Her father, years ago, leaning over the hood of their aging station wagon. His hands were covered in grease, his eyes laser-focused, and his voice gentle as he explained the workings of a carburetor like it was a piece of magic. She had stood beside him on tiptoe, nodding along even when she didn't understand. The memory was gone as fast as it came, buried under layers of purpose. Sabrina didn't like sentiment. She didn't have time for nostalgia. What mattered was the outcome. She wasn't rooting for Malik to fail out of spite. She needed him to fail to reinforce her empire. An empire built on relentless precision and an unyielding belief in intellect above all else. But life has a way of flipping the script. The same spotlight you set up for someone's downfall can just as easily illuminate your own reckoning. Sabrina thought she was about to prove a point. What she didn't know was that the lesson that day wasn't for Malik. It was for her. Because if Sabrina's life was a symphony of boardrooms and business deals, Malik's life played out in the steady rhythm of socket wrenches and oil pans on the corner of Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. The Johnson family garage wasn't glamorous. Its sign was faded, the pavement cracked, and the waiting room had exactly 2 chairs, both of which squeaked when you sat down. But for 3 generations, that garage had kept cars on the road and people's lives moving. Malik was raised in that space. His first memories weren't of cartoons or playgrounds, but of engines in pieces, the smell of gasoline, and his grandfather humming blues while adjusting spark plugs. By 10, he was changing tires better than most grown men. By 16, he could strip and rebuild an engine from scratch. School was fine, but it wasn't where he thrived. While other kids chased grades and trophies, Malik chased solutions. His education came from real-world puzzles. Engines that wouldn't start, brakes that failed, alternators that died in the cold. His lessons were built on patience, attention to detail, and the quiet dignity of doing a job right the first time. Teachers told him to dream bigger. But Malik didn't see anything small about keeping a neighbor's car running when they couldn't afford a new one. After high school, he stayed right where he was, working full-time at the family shop, side by side with his father. It wasn't easy. Money was tight. Sometimes the choice was between new parts or putting food on the table. But Malik didn't quit. He showed up every day, solving problems, one engine at a time. And it wasn't just cars. Neighbors came to him with busted generators, broken lawnmowers, and kids' dirt bikes that refused to roar. Malik had a gift, not just for machines, but for listening. He never laughed when someone said, "It makes a clunk-clunk sound," and he never dismissed them when their gut said something was wrong, even if the tests didn't show it yet. That kind of patience built trust. And that trust? That's what got Helix Dynamics' attention. A junior engineer visiting family in Kansas City saw him in action, watched him fix a problem 3 other shops had failed to diagnose. Within an hour, Malik had the car running like new. No ego, no theatrics, just methodical skill. That engineer went back and told his supervisor, "This guy thinks like one of us, but with hands that solve instead of just simulate." Malik never expected a call. When the assistant from Helix reached out asking if he'd take a look at their prototype, he thought it was a prank. Why would a billion-dollar tech firm be calling a grease-stained guy with no degree and a pickup truck? But the voice on the phone didn't sound condescending. It sounded desperate. So, against every instinct, he said yes. The trip to Dallas wasn't flashy. He drove all night in his truck, toolbox rattling in the back, crashing at rest stops instead of hotels. By the time he pulled up to Helix HQ, his clothes were wrinkled, his boots dusty, but his mind was clear. Walking through glass doors that opened like whispers and floors that shined like museum marble, he felt the contrast. He knew the looks he was getting, saw the subtle glances at his hands, his clothes, his calloused fingers. But Malik didn't shrink. He'd repaired engines built before some of these engineers were born. He'd seen systems far messier and more stubborn than anything Helix had under glass. And the quiet truth was, Malik Johnson didn't care about fitting in. He didn't come to make a statement. He came because someone asked for help. And helping, that was his language. Still, when he stepped into the boardroom and heard the snickers at Sabrina's so-called wager, it stung. Not because he doubted himself, but because that laugh, he'd heard it before. From teachers who didn't believe in him. From customers who second-guessed his skills until their engines roared back to life. From people who assumed a degree was the only proof of intelligence. This wasn't new. But what came next would be. To Malik, this wasn't pressure. It was just another test. And tests didn't rattle him. They refined him. The prototype sat like a wounded beast in the center of the boardroom, more mess than miracle. Wires dangled like frayed nerves, bolts scattered like afterthoughts across the metal tray, and one panel still bore a charred scar from a previous failed attempt. It was less a breakthrough and more a cautionary tale. Sabrina stood with arms crossed, her tone clipped and clinical. "Mr. Johnson, I'll be straight with you. You're only here because my assistant seems convinced you have some kind of unique touch. But let's be clear. This engine represents 4 years of relentless development, hundreds of millions in R&D, and the collective effort of some of the sharpest engineering minds in the country. And not one of them could make it run. So you'll have to excuse me if I don't exactly bet the future of Helix on a guy who changes spark plugs for a living." A few muffled laughs rippled around the table. Malik didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the engine, tracing his fingers along the wires, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. His calm unsettled the room. Finally, he looked up. "Changing spark plugs pays the bills," he said, voice even. "But don't confuse straightforward work with simple thinking. Machines don't care what degrees you have. They respond to respect." The room went still. One of the younger engineers, seated in the back, leaned in a little. Curious now. Sabrina arched an eyebrow, sarcasm dripping from her smirk. "Respect? That's your secret? I've got PhDs in this room who couldn't fix that thing, and you're telling me what it needs is manners?" Malik gave a half shrug, tightening a wire. "Sometimes that's exactly what it needs. Watching, listening, not jumping in to prove how smart you are, but being willing to understand what it's trying to tell you." The older engineer in the glasses scoffed. "This is nonsense. He doesn't even have the schematics. He doesn't know the control logic or the software stack." Malik didn't engage. Instead, he asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "When's the last time anyone looked at the actual wiring harness instead of just running simulations?" Silence. Sabrina narrowed her eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm saying," Malik replied, still calm, that not all problems are buried in code or theory. Sometimes the answer is right in front of you, but you're too busy proving how advanced you are to notice. That stung. A ripple of discomfort moved through the engineers. Sabrina's jaw tensed, even as her smile lingered. Then she said it, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "All right then. If you can fix this engine right now, I'll marry you." Gasps. A few chuckles, half shocked, half entertained. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Some weren't sure if she was joking. Her voice had that sharp, mocking edge, the kind that dared anyone to challenge her. Malik slowly rose to his full height and met her gaze with steady eyes. "Careful with promises like that, ma'am," he said. "Words have a funny way of coming back around." The silence was immediate. No one expected that level of poise from him. Not in this room, not under these lights. Sabrina tilted her head, still in control, or trying to be. "Fine," she said. "Go on. Impress us." Malik nodded, then knelt beside the prototype. He opened his toolkit, selected a wrench, and got to work. Every movement deliberate, measured. From the back of the room, a young woman whispered to a colleague, "He's not even hesitating." The older engineer scoffed again. "He's bluffing. This'll be embarrassing." But Malik stayed locked in. He adjusted a loose connector, resecured a mounting bracket, and rerouted a wire bundle with a quiet efficiency that made even the skeptics pause. He wasn't performing. He was just doing what he always did, treating the machine with full attention, as if its problems mattered. For the first time, a flicker of doubt passed across Sabrina Holt's face. And doubt is dangerous in a room where you've built your identity on being unshakable. Every eye was on Malik Johnson now. The air conditioner hummed faintly above, but the tension muted everything else. He pulled a flashlight from his bag, shone it across the wiring, and muttered under his breath, "Too tight. It's choking the current." The senior engineer leaned forward again. What is he even doing? He doesn't know the tolerances. He's guessing. Malik didn't glance up. "Not guessing," he said quietly. "Watching." He loosened a clamp, repositioned a harness. Then he tapped the side of the housing with the back of his wrench. The resulting sound was wrong, off, dull. His brow furrowed. Sabrina's voice cut in, smug as ever. "So what now, Mr. Johnson? You going to knock on it until it starts talking?" Without missing a beat, Malik replied, "Machines always talk. The question is whether you're listening." This time, no one laughed. The younger engineers who'd once dismissed him now leaned forward, watching every move. He unscrewed a side panel and ran his fingers along the intake manifold. A thin crack, barely visible, revealed itself under the light. He pointed. "There. That fracture's small, but it's throwing off your pressure balance. Chokes the system before it stabilizes." An engineer stood, squinting at the crack. "How did we miss that?" Malik didn't gloat. He just answered, "Because you were hunting for complexity. Sometimes the big failures hide behind small mistakes." His words hit harder than he probably meant them to. Still focused, he replaced the cracked part with a spare left behind by one of the earlier engineers. Then, with practiced efficiency, he reworked the harness to reroute the sensor lines cleanly. Sabrina tapped a pen against the table. "Even if you're right about the crack, it doesn't explain why the software kept crashing the startup sequence." Malik stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. Because the system was getting misaligned signals. The harness was wired too tight against the housing. It was interfering with the sensors. The computer couldn't understand what it was receiving. The room fell silent again. No one argued. Malik took a step back and gave a small nod toward the engineers. "Power it up." The older man shook his head. "It won't matter. We've tried this setup 100 times." Malik met his eyes, calm as ever. "Then once more won't hurt." Sabrina raised an eyebrow. Her lips curled, already preparing whatever cutting remark she'd deliver when it failed. "Do it," she said. "Start it up." One of the younger engineers hesitated, then tapped the control pad. At first, it sounded like every failed attempt before it, a sputter, a whine, the mechanical equivalent of a sigh. Sabrina's smirk started to reappear, her lips parting, ready to deliver the final jab. But then, the sound changed. The cough turned into a hum. The engine steadied. A smooth, rhythmic pulse rolled through the boardroom, the unmistakable sound of success. Low, clean, alive. It's running, someone whispered. It's actually running. Gasps scattered across the room like electricity. Engineers who had spent sleepless nights trying and failing now stared, wide-eyed, as the impossible happened in real time. Sabrina's expression froze. The pen she'd been tapping halted midair. The smirk was gone. Malik stood quietly with his arms folded, calm as ever. All it needed, he said simply, was someone to listen. The engine kept humming, steady and sure, a mechanical heartbeat that mocked every doubt, every assumption that had filled that room moments earlier. Engineers surged forward, scanning diagnostics, double-checking voltage levels, speechless as the readings confirmed what they were seeing. One turned to Sabrina, stunned. He fixed it. Completely. For a long beat, no one said a word. The engine spoke for them, its rhythmic pulse a steady drum of truth. And then Malik's voice cut through the silence. I told you, he said evenly. Degrees don't fix engines. Respect does. Sabrina's eyes locked on him. Her confidence, normally impenetrable, had cracked. She'd built an entire career on being the smartest, most composed voice in the room. But now, in front of her own team, the man she'd mocked had succeeded where her best minds had failed. And sometimes, the silence after someone wins tells you more than applause ever could. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then the spell broke. Engineers rushed toward the machine. Those who had laughed at Malik only minutes earlier were now crowding around the prototype like converts at a miracle. Diagnostic screens flashed green. Stability readings held. Nothing crashed. Nothing failed. This shouldn't be happening, the senior engineer murmured, staring at the readouts. It's holding. Voltage is consistent. Load is balanced. His voice was a mix of disbelief and something else. Guilt. Weeks of simulations, he added under his breath. And he finds it in minutes. Malik didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat or soak in the reversal. He stayed right where he was, quiet, arms crossed, expression steady. For him, this wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about doing the job right. But Sabrina felt it differently. Her eyes were still fixed on the engine, but her mind had spiraled into 1,000 thoughts. Every instinct told her to reclaim control, to remind them who she was. But she couldn't, not when the truth was humming 3 feet away, undeniable and irrefutable. A younger engineer turned to Malik, her voice soft with awe. How did you see it so fast? Malik glanced at her, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Machines don't lie. People do. We overcomplicate things. But a machine? It'll tell you the truth, if you're patient enough to hear it. The words settled hard in the room. Heads nodded slowly. Some of the engineers exchanged glances like they'd just been handed a truth that no lecture or textbook had ever given them. Sabrina finally spoke. Her voice didn't have the same edge. It was quieter now. You make it sound easy. Malik met her gaze. I didn't say it was easy. I said it was simple. There's a difference. And that's where most folks go wrong. Once again, silence. But this silence felt different. Not awkward. Not tense. Reflective. For the first time in her career, Sabrina felt her authority waver, not because it had been challenged, but because the room's respect had shifted. Not in rebellion, but in revelation. Toward a man she had dismissed before he even touched the engine. And deep down it hit her. That tightening in her gut wasn't humiliation, it was recognition. Of the way people once looked at her. Of the way she'd been overlooked, underestimated, laughed at. Now she was on the other side of it. The irony was as heavy as the quiet. The senior engineer cleared his throat, trying to redirect. Well, clearly this is valuable input. Perhaps Mr. Johnson would consider, consulting with us going forward? But the offer hung limp. Everyone in the room knew it wasn't valuable input. It was a wake-up call. Malik gave a small nod, still not chasing the spotlight. "I'll help where I can," he said. "But let's be clear, this wasn't luck. It was listening. It's amazing what you hear when you stop letting pride drown everything out." More than a few heads lowered. Engineers scribbled into notebooks, not formulas, but principles. Something they couldn't download from a Helix server. Sabrina's throat felt dry. Part of her wanted to snap, to remind them all who signed their paychecks, to reassert control. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't about hierarchy anymore. This was about truth. And when truth stares you in the face, you don't fight it. You either accept it, or you get left behind. And truth doesn't just want to be acknowledged. It demands transformation. When the meeting finally wrapped, no one bolted for the exit like they usually did. The boardroom stayed full. Engineers still huddled around the engine, whispering to one another, dissecting every adjustment Malik had made, replaying the moment their beliefs were rewritten. For once, they weren't arguing over specs or buried in code. They were replaying what had just unfolded, how Malik Johnson had shifted the entire room's perspective without raising his voice or demanding attention. Less than an hour, and the world inside that boardroom had changed. Sabrina remained at the head of the table, the once clicking pen now resting quietly on the polished surface. Her mind, usually laser-focused and quick to analyze, felt heavy, like it was still catching up. She found herself retracing her own words. The sarcasm, the challenge disguised as a joke, the laughter that followed, and then the silence. The moment when Malik, without fanfare, proved her wrong. She glanced toward him. He was packing his tools, methodical, calm, like always. No smirk, no swagger, just steady hands placing each item back where it belonged. He didn't need to say, "I told you so." The results said it for him. Finally, Sabrina broke the silence. "Mr. Johnson." He looked up, unmoved. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice faltered, just a little, the first crack in its usual composure. "I underestimated you." Malik tilted his head, then offered a half-smile. "You wouldn't be the first." That reply hit harder than any insult. It wasn't spiteful, it was a quiet truth. She knew, in that instant, how often men like him had been dismissed. Not because they lacked skill, but because people like her never bothered to look beneath the surface. She leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath. "What you did today? It embarrassed me." A few engineers froze, unsure if she was gearing up for another sharp rebuke. But her next words were softer, honest. "Not because you made me look bad, but because you reminded me how small I was acting." Another wave of silence swept the room. This one wasn't tense, it was respectful. A few engineers looked at each other, surprised, maybe even moved. Malik studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the hardest engines to fix aren't the ones sitting in front of you." That hit her deeper than she expected. Sabrina didn't apologize, not publicly. Not yet. But in that moment, something shifted. The armor she wore so tightly, her sharpness, her need to dominate, cracked just enough for something else to show through. Humility. As Malik walked out of the boardroom, toolbox in hand, the young engineer who had watched him the whole time called out, "Mr. Johnson, thank you." He turned, gave a small nod, and kept walking. No dramatic exit. No need for it. Because he didn't just leave behind a functioning prototype. He left a lesson none of them would forget. Sabrina stayed seated long after the room cleared. She stared at the machine, its steady rhythm vibrating faintly beneath her feet. It wasn't just working, it was teaching. Teaching her that titles, money, and degrees didn't mean much if you stopped listening. Later, when she met with the board to discuss next steps, she caught them off guard. No projections, no charts, no investor pitches. She began with something unexpected. Sometimes, the answers we need don't come from the top. They come from the places we're too proud to look. The room shifted. Some engineers nodded. Others looked stunned. But everyone felt the difference in her tone. And that's the real story here. It wasn't just about a mechanic fixing an engine. It was about pride meeting humility. About the quiet power of respect outlasting the noise of arrogance. about realizing that greatness doesn't always wear a blazer or hang a diploma on the wall. Malik Johnson walked into that boardroom as the man no one believed in. He walked out as the man who reminded them all that patience, humility, and respect aren't just tools for machines. They're tools for people. So here's the takeaway. Don't dismiss someone's work just because it looks different from yours. Don't mock what you don't understand, because the person you overlook today might be the one holding the answers when your world starts to fall apart. And if this story made you pause, even for a second, think about the people you might be underestimating. The ones you pass by, the ones you don't ask. Start listening and show them the respect they've always deserved. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.